Hello and welcome to my channel. I am so glad that you're here. My name is Hillary Queen. They also call me the Queen of Interiors and Architecture. I'm so happy today to be explaining to you guys how I created this featured wall. This featured wall was very simple, and I'm going to tell you how I did it in 5 simple steps. So let's start. So step 1 was the planning phase. My client had been living in that space for about 15 years and hadn't updated that area. So she came to me and she was like, look Hillary, I want something that's new, something that makes the room feel a bit more cozy and homely, but I really want it for a really good inexpensive price and something that can be a fun DIY project during this quarantine period. So I sat down with her and she was telling me that her family means so much to her. So I came up with the idea of perhaps creating a wall montage. And I actually got this idea from walking through Ikea, and one of their exhibitions had this beautiful wall collage or photo collage of family, and I thought it was just very beautiful, and something that was actually quite quick and inexpensive to do. So we started out by planning. We started out by picking what type of photos she wanted to have on the wall. One thing that was very important was also measuring the wall. For me, I work best by designing things on the computer first and visualizing it on the computer first, and then seeing how we can adjust things. And then once that's finalized, then we move on to the real thing. So I created a concept online first. I used Photoshop, and I just placed the images and took the dimensions of the wall and fit out the photos on my concept, and it was really fun to do. And I think one of the most important things is figuring out the sizes. So one tip that I would give is, if you love designing things on the computer, you can design it on the computer first or draw up a plan. My client preferred that most of her frames are in black and white because she was going for a gray and white and black color scheme in that room. So we decided that the photos were going to be in black and white. So throughout the planning process, we were quite set on there being 3 different sizes. So one was A4 size photo portrait, the other was A5, and then the other was A3. So that there was a bit of a variety on the wall, and then it broke up the pieces a bit, so it was a bit more exciting to look at. So once we had laid that all out on Photoshop, we're able to then know where to start. So now that brings me on to step 2, is finding the materials. So we used very inexpensive materials. We used a lot of materials that we could find quite locally. One was the board that we were to insert into the wall. Now, when we were looking for boards, we couldn't find anything that was not too heavy, but also not too flimsy. So something that wouldn't just like completely fall off. So we needed something that was dense enough to hold the frames up. So most commonly people would go for wood, but we didn't find wood in the size that we wanted specifically, and we were also on a tight budget. So we decided that we would use tiling board. Now I'm gonna find the specific name for that material, but it's usually used for putting tiles onto when you're constructing bathrooms actually. So I've never actually used the material before myself, but I knew that it had the properties that would work very well when it comes to holding up the frames and also pinning them very easily. Yeah, then now the next step was to look for frames, and looking for frames was actually harder than we actually thought it was going to be, because we had to find frames that were A5, A3, and A4. And frames can be very expensive. Now, I should have gone into the frames business because we were looking for about like 25 different frames. I forgot the number specifically, but we needed a lot and in different sizes. And we needed them specifically black and white. So we were running about trying to look for the right type of frames, and it was harder than we thought. Now, we ended up finding a shop that sold them really inexpensively, so we literally bought them in bulk. So I picked up a variety of A4. I knew specifically, because I did the design already in the computer, how many pieces that I needed of each size, which was very important because this is now what I used to then lay them on the board. Bought a whole bunch of them at the same time. We literally looked crazy. But I was so pleased that we were able to find them in black and white. It doesn't really matter how many of the black and white that you get. What matters is that you get a variety. Now coming to the final material that we had to look for, and that was something that would enable us to cover the board quite quickly. We didn't want to paint because that would have just been too tedious and would have taken too much time. So I came up with the idea of using wallpaper, because she had already used wallpaper in that office space. So we thought, why not reuse the same wallpaper in the featured wall? So it actually came out really, really nicely. So I'm glad we used that, and it's a really quick and inexpensive also route in terms of if you want something that was very effective, very quick, and also quite sustainable, so it lasts for quite a long time. Now the third step was now bringing all the materials together and cutting down or cutting the materials to fit the wall. Now the wall was a very specific size, so we had to make sure that we got the right proportions. And the great thing about the tiling board that we got, tile board that we got, was that it was really easy to cut. So you could cut it with just a cutting knife. And that saved us so much time. So once we had cut the board, we then were able to place it and adjust to fit the wall. And what we used to fit it onto the wall was just pins. So you just needed to, because the wall was sort of laid with sort of like a wooden frame, so we could just pin it onto the wood. So we used pins. Then now once the board was placed onto the wall, we then covered it up with wallpaper. And the wallpaper that we chose was the grey wallpaper. This grey wallpaper was also used for the walls, so it had this really smooth, like sort of consistency. You wouldn't even have been able to tell that it was a wooden frame. So once we had placed the board onto the wooden frame, we were then able to get the wallpaper and place it on temporarily just to see the sizing and see how it would look and how it would match with the wall. And it was just seamless. The color completely matched the walls around, and I think we literally had a moment. Now, once we had cut the wallpaper, we had to use wool paper glue to then stick it onto the tile board. And then once we had done that, we were able to then cut the remaining cut-offs at the end that was sticking out. So we had like a smooth finish in the edges all around, and we used our cutting knife. So that was the only knife that we needed to use. It was very handy that we had the cutting knife, and I think the great thing about this process is that anyone can do it. Tools that you can find from any local DIY store. So now once the photos were in the frames and we liked the proportions, I think it's also very important to note that whatever we're placing beside each other was a different size. So again, it breaks that up. And I think you can have fun with it. You can completely make it random, or you can make it, you know, A5 and A4 or A3 and A5. It's completely up to you. You can make it symmetrical or you can make it asymmetrical. It's completely up to you. Now, that leads me finally onto step 5, which is to stand back and admire your new featured wall. When we stood back and really looked at the whole thing with the whole room in place together, it really worked out because, again, my client wanted a black and white color scheme with gray undertones, and I think this was a really great idea to be able to still bring that cozy, warm feeling, and also be able to put images that not only you love but also inspired you. So we also put motivational words on it. She loved manifesting things, so she put some of the goals that she was aspiring to, and I think it's such a great idea for an office. If you're renovating your office or you're starting a home office this period, this is a really great way of really spazzing up your office space. So I'm so glad that you've made it all the way to the end, and if you're starting one or you're changing your home office or you're gonna do any of these ideas I've just given you, please send them to me. I'd love to take a look at them. Also, I would love it if you can subscribe and like this video and give me a big thumbs up. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Peace and love. Mwah. Love you guys. Bye bye.